a student called Sandra, talking to her tutor about a draft proposal she has written for a competition.
Right, Sandra. You wanted to see me to get some feedback on your group's proposal, the one you're submitting for the Geography Society field trip competition.
Uh-huh.
I've had a look through your proposal, and I think it's a really good choice. In fact, I only have a few things to say about it, but even in an outline document like this, you really have to be careful to avoid typos and problems with layout in the proposal, and even in the contents page. So read it through carefully before submitting it, okay?
Will do.
And I've made a few notes on the proposal about things which could have been better sequenced.
Okay.
As for the writing itself, I've annotated the proposal as and where I thought it could be improved. Generally speaking, I feel you've often used complex structures and long sentences for the sake of it, and as a consequence, although your paragraphing and inclusion of subheadings help, it's quite hard to follow your train of thought at times.
Oh.
So, cut them down a bit, can you?
Really?
Yes, and don't forget simple formatting like numbering.
Didn't I use page numbers?
I didn't mean that. Look, you've remembered to include headers and footers, which is good, but listing ideas clearly is important. Number them or use bullet points, which is even clearer. Then you'll focus the reader on your main points. I thought your suggestion to go to the Navajo Tribal Park was a very good idea.
No, I've always wanted to go there. My father was a great fan of cowboy films and the Wild West, so I was subjected to seeing all the epics, many of which were shot there.
Mm-hmm.
As a consequence, it feels very familiar to me, and it's awesome, both geographically and visually. So it's somewhere I've always wanted to visit. The subsequent research I did and the online photographs made me even keener.
Interesting. Right, let's look at the content of your proposal now.
Did you find it comprehensive enough?
Well, yes and no. You've listed several different topics on your contents page, but I'm not sure they're all relevant.
No? Well, I thought that from the perspective of a field trip, one thing I needed to focus on was the sandstone plateau and cliffs themselves. The way they tower up from the flat landscape is just amazing. The fact that the surrounding softer rocks were eroded by wind and rain, leaving these huge outcrops high above the plain. It's hardly surprising that tourists flock to see the area.
Well, yes, I'd agree with including those points.
And then the fact that it's been home to Native American Navajos and all the social history that goes with that. The hardships they endured trying to save their territory from the invading settlers. Their culture is so rich. All those wonderful stories.
Well, I agree it's interesting, but it's not immediately relevant to your proposal, Sandra. So, at this stage, I suggest you focus on other considerations. I think an indication of what the students on the trip could actually do when they get there should be far more central, so that certainly needs to be included and to be expanded upon. And I'd like to see something about the local wildlife and vegetation, too. Not that I imagine there's much to see. Presumably the tourist invasion hasn't helped.
Okay, I'll do some work on those two areas as well. But you're right, there's not much apart from some very shallow-rooted species. Although it's cold and snowy there in the winter, the earth is baked so hard in the summer sun that rainwater can't penetrate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a case of flood or drought, really.
So I understand. Now, before we look at everything in more detail, I've got a few factual questions for you. It would be a good idea to include the answers in your finished proposal, because they're missing from your draft.
Fine.
So, you mentioned the monoliths and the spires, which was good. But what area does the tribal park cover? Do you know?
12,000 hectares, and the plain is at about 5,850 meters above sea level.
Larger than I expected. Okay. Where's the nearest accommodation? That's a practical detail that you haven't included. Have you done any research on that?
Yes. There's nowhere to stay in the park itself, but there's an old trading post called Goulding quite near. All kinds of tours start from Goulding, too.
What kind of tours?
Well, the most popular are in four-wheel drive Jeeps, but I wouldn't recommend hiring those. I think the best way to appreciate the area would be to hire horses instead and trek around on those. Biking is not allowed, and it's impossible to drive around the area in private vehicles. The tracks are too rough.
Okay. Lastly, what else is worth visiting there?
There are several caves, but I haven't looked into any details. I'll find out about them.
Okay, good. Now what I'd like to know is more about...
Aubrey Gordon, you just need to lose weight, and 19 other myths about fat people. If someone doesn't want to be fat, they can just lose weight. Fat people are always unhealthy. Supporting fat people just glorifies obesity. Myths like these have loomed over discussions about weight for decades. These harmful mistruths largely stem from anti-fat discrimination and society's view of thinness as an ideal. Despite being debunked time and time again, these ideas persist because they confirm the internal biases that many people already have against fatness. You Just Need to Lose Weight by Aubrey Gordon features some of the most common misconceptions that society holds against fat people. In this blink, we'll take a closer look at how some of these myths came to be and learn about the difficulties faced by fat people in our society every single day. From the creation of the widely criticized body mass index to the origins of the so-called obesity epidemic, we'll give you the information that will help you sort out fact from fiction. By the time we're finished, you'll be able to reframe discussions surrounding weight, discover and analyze your own internal biases, and support fat activists in their fight to make the world a more inclusive place for everyone. We should not be afraid of the word fat. Author Aubrey Gordon was standing in airport security when she overheard a young girl call her a fat lady. The girl's mother was horrified, but Gordon simply smiled. "It's okay, I am fat," she replied. Refusing to accept this answer, the mother continued to warn her daughter that using this word was inappropriate and that she should never say it again. Gordon has had conversations of this nature many times. Over the course of her life, she's lost count of how many times she's had to convince people that she's not offended by the word fat. This isn't to say that she hasn't had her weight used against her as an insult. Unfortunately, Gordon admits that she's been called much worse things than fat, often by complete strangers. She has overheard servers making remarks under their breath at dinner, and has even been screamed at by angry men while walking down the street. You may be surprised to learn that these kinds of experiences are not the ones that hurt the most. The moments that truly sting are when well-meaning people avoid the word fat by using euphemisms to skirt around it, like the nurse who referred to Aubrey as sturdy while explaining that there wasn't a blood pressure cuff large enough to fit her. For Gordon and many others, avoiding the word only stigmatizes it, making it seem as if it's an insult to be fat. Instead, many fat people are choosing to reclaim the word. For them, fat is neither positive nor negative. It's a neutral descriptor of their bodies. As a society, we've grown accustomed to seeing this word in a negative light, sometimes viewing it as the equivalent of a curse word or a slur. However, Gordon chooses to accept the word for what it is, just one of many that could be used to describe her. She's also blonde, tall, and a woman. Some people choose to be fat, others do not. One of the most pervasive myths surrounding fat people is that they choose to be fat and could lose weight if they really wanted to. After all, diet culture suggests that this should be simple, right? Calories in, calories out. If only it were that easy. We often learn from a young age that our bodies are the direct result of the work we're willing to put in. If someone is thin, it means they're hardworking and motivated. If someone is fat, it means they're lazy. These assertions blindly ignore the mounting evidence that individual body weight is based on a multitude of complex factors and often has little to do with choice. A 2016 article from the New York Times stated that most Americans believe obesity is related to willpower, despite clear links to genetics. The truth is that while some people choose to be fat, others do not. Many fat people try to lose weight but are unsuccessful for a number of reasons. There are even several health conditions, such as lipedema and polycystic ovary syndrome, that can make losing weight extremely difficult. Ironically, when very fat people do lose weight, it may actually increase their likelihood of gaining back even more. A study of former contestants from the reality TV series The Biggest Loser found that quick and dramatic weight loss permanently damages metabolism and makes it harder to lose weight as time goes on. On the other end of the spectrum, there are people who identify as gainers. Referred to as fat on purpose by writer Bruce Owens Grimm, gainers are people who aim to openly reject anti-fat bias by attempting to gain weight. Contrary to popular belief, this is not a form of self-sabotage, but rather a protest against discrimination. That being said, not every fat person has tried to lose or gain weight, or even has a desire to change their body at all. Everyone has the right to accept their body for what it is. The question then remains, if people can choose to be comfortable with their own bodies, why can't others accept them too? The use of the body mass index is harmful for many groups of people. Even if you've never tried to lose weight, odds are you've been exposed in some way to the body mass index. Although it's been regarded as a gold standard measurement for years, the cloudy history of the BMI is uneven at best. The body mass index is a formula for measuring weight-to-height ratio, created around 200 years ago by a Belgian academic named Adolphe Quetelet. You might be surprised to learn that Quetelet was not a physician. In fact, he didn't study medicine at all. His specialties were mathematics, statistics, astronomy, and sociology. As a mathematician, Quetelet strongly believed in averages. In his eyes, the mathematical mean of a population represented an ideal of normalcy that everyone should aspire to. The problem was that gathering population-level data for his experiments required more time and resources than he had access to. As a result, the formula that Quetelet used to create his ideal weight-to-height ratio was limited to data from male patients of French and Scottish descent. And so, the concept of the ideal average being white and male was created. An idea that would be used to justify scientific and institutional racism and misogyny in the centuries that followed. Whatever Quetelet's initial intentions were, he made one fact very clear. His work was meant to represent the population as a whole. It was never supposed to represent the individual, especially when it comes to personal health, which is exactly how it's being used today. Medical reliance on the body mass index is particularly dangerous because it's often highly inaccurate for many different groups, especially people of color. For example, the measurement frequently overestimates risk levels associated with weight for Black people, while underestimating those same risks for Asian communities. The relationship between weight, muscle mass, and health risks is unique to each person and based on a host of different factors, including human biology, our environment, and genetics. Relying on such a homogeneous measurement is not only misleading, but it can result in misdiagnosis and potential harm. Misleading studies have led to an overblown panic over the obesity epidemic. In the early 2000s, the beginning of a new century brought with it a host of new questions and possibilities. This was also the time when Americans were suddenly and dramatically informed that they were in the midst of an obesity epidemic. Average body weight in America had been steadily rising in the previous decades, but the issue wasn't considered an immediate concern. This began to change in 1995 when the World Health Organization decided to simultaneously adopt the body mass index as its preferred measurement of body size and lower the threshold for what was considered overweight and obese. There was no sudden increase in average body weight, but over the next few years, public rhetoric changed drastically. As far as the media was concerned, a devastating obesity epidemic had begun. New broadcasts were increasingly filled with horror stories about the so-called health crisis, superimposed over unflattering images of fat people's bodies. In 2004, the Journal of the American Medical Association published a controversial study called Actual Causes of Death in the United States, which shockingly claimed that 400,000 Americans were dying each year as a result of being overweight. As you might expect, this study immediately captured the public's attention, but its findings were widely debated among other researchers. One major issue was that the data sources used were not representative of the current population. In fact, the oldest data sets were pulled from 1951. Living conditions, food systems, and even the threshold for what was considered overweight had changed dramatically in those 50 years. This study failed to take these factors into account, resulting in highly inflated mortality estimates. Although this study and many others like it have been widely discredited, the connection between obesity and mortality is still a highly debated topic among researchers. While fat people can die from conditions we generally associate with weight, like type 2 diabetes and heart disease, these diseases kill thin people too. Assuming that weight is a major factor in these deaths ignores other complications like family history, lifestyle, and access to health care. As is the case with the BMI, oversimplifying the issue and relying on generic calculations is a dangerous game to play. Treating fat people fairly does not glorify obesity. When Aubrey Gordon was 18 years old, she posted a picture of herself in a bathing suit on a blogging platform called LiveJournal. The one piece was modest, but it was the first time that Gordon had found a swimsuit that she actually liked on her body. Having less than 100 followers, she didn't expect much of a response. Unfortunately, leagues of angry commenters found their way onto the site to harass her. Most left negative comments about her appearance, but some accused her of glorifying obesity. She was understandably confused. She was just trying to post one of the rare positive moments she had with her own body. How could this be seen as glorifying anything? This leads us to another very common myth about weight, that supporting fat people glorifies obesity. Like the other misconceptions we talked about in previous sections, this idea is deeply rooted in anti-fat bias and body discrimination. Consider for a moment the comments you might see under a picture of a thin person wearing a swimsuit. Odds are the reactions would be overwhelmingly positive. Why then is this not considered glorifying thinness? In the age of social media, this issue is something that fat people have to navigate every day. If someone who doesn't fit the mold posts a picture online, even something as innocent as eating dinner or sitting on the beach, it's often seen as an act of defiance against social norms. The media's influence on this topic cannot be overstated. Nearly every news outlet is quick to praise weight loss and mock weight gain. Tabloids will happily chastise a celebrity for gaining weight after pregnancy, then congratulate them when they finally lose the baby weight. Ironically, glorifying fatness has very little to do with the actions of fat people. It is more closely related to the attitudes of those who have never been fat and their anxiety surrounding the topic. The only way to combat this stigma is for these people to put in the work and analyze their own internal biases to discover why accepting fat people makes them so uncomfortable. Skinny shaming is individual, while fat shaming represents a broader cultural bias. Shaming anyone for how they look is wrong, no matter which way, shape, or form it's presented. Our bodies are our own. They are not something to be judged by other people. This simple fact should be obvious, but body shaming is a very real and unfortunate part of modern life. Under the banner of body shaming, there are two categories that often get the most attention: skinny shaming and fat shaming. Neither is fair or appropriate, but one is significantly more harmful than the other. Viewing these two practices on an individual level, they seem pretty similar. At its core, any kind of body shaming boils down to making someone feel less than, based solely on their appearance. However, when we look beyond the damage done to the individual, things start to get more complicated. The main problem lies in the fact that skinny shaming is an act of individualized aggression, while fat shaming is a systemic issue. Being criticized for looking too thin is obviously harmful to one's well-being, but it's not the same as not being able to meet your most basic needs. Fat shaming is part of a complicated web of institutional, cultural, and personal biases meant to keep fat people trapped on the edge of society. Body shaming has never been a way to create positive, meaningful change. Telling someone they need to eat more is not going to make them gain weight, just as telling someone they're fat is not going to make them lose weight. The only byproducts of this practice are pain, shame, and feelings of isolation. People of all sizes can benefit from fighting against body shaming and supporting fat activism. Thin people can help by confronting their own preconceived notions about fatness and speaking out against body shaming when they see it. Fat people can support this process by continuing to tell their stories and share their unique experiences. In this blink to "you just need to lose weight," you've learned that myths about weight are deeply ingrained in nearly every part of our society. These harmful ideas stem from a long history of anti-fat bias and are used to isolate anyone who doesn't fit the perceived social norms for appearance. Every day, fat people are forced to defend their own bodies, trying to make their way in a world that was never designed to include them. From the idea that they should easily be able to lose weight, to the concept of the obesity epidemic, our conversations about weight are deeply flawed. By learning about these myths and the real truths behind them, you've taken a crucial step in the fight against anti-fat discrimination. By re-examining our own internal biases and actively supporting the work of fat activists, we can help make the world a more inclusive place for people of all shapes and sizes.
You will hear a lecturer's introduction to a geography module.
So, welcome to your introductory geography lecture. We'll begin with some basics. Firstly, what do we learn by studying geography? Well, we learn a great deal about all the processes that have affected and that continue to affect the Earth's surface. But we learn far more than that, because studying geography also informs us about the different kinds of relationships that develop between a particular environment and the people that live there. Okay, we like to think of geography as having two main branches. There's the study of the nature of our planet, its physical features, what it actually looks like, and then there's the study of the ways in which we choose to live and of the impact of those on our planet. Our current use of carbon fuels is a good example of that. But there are more specific study areas to consider too, and we'll be looking at each of these in turn throughout the semester. These include biophysical geography, by which I mean the study of the natural environment and all its living things. Then there's topography. That looks at the shapes of the land and oceans. There's the study of political geography, and social geography too, of course, which is the study of communities of people. We have economic geography, in which we examine all kinds of resources and their use, agriculture for example. Next comes historical geography, the understanding of how people and their environments and the ways they interact have changed over a period of time. And urban geography, an aspect I'm particularly interested in, which takes as its focus the location of cities, the services that those cities provide, and migration of people to and from such cities. And lastly, we have cartography. That's the art and science of map making. You'll be doing a lot of that. So, to summarise before we continue, we now have our key answer. Studying this subject is important because without geographical knowledge, we would know very little about our surroundings and we wouldn't be able to identify all the problems that relate to them. So, by definition, we wouldn't be in an informed position to work out how to solve any of them. Okay, now for some practicalities. What do geographers actually do? Well, we collect data to begin with. You'll be doing a lot of that on your first field trip. How do we do this? There are several means. We might, for example, conduct a census, count a population in a given area perhaps. We also need images of the Earth's surface which we can produce by means of computer generation technology or with the help of satellite relays. We've come a very long way from the early exploration of the world by sailing ships, when geographers only had pens and paper at their disposal. After we've gathered our information, we must analyse it. We need to look for patterns, most commonly those of causes and consequences. This kind of information helps us to predict and resolve problems that could affect the world we live in. But we don't keep all this information confidential. We then need to publish our findings so that other people can access it and be informed by it. And one way in which this information can be published is in the form of maps. You'll all have used one at some stage of your life already. Let's consider the benefits of maps from a geographer's perspective. Maps can be folded and put in a pocket and can provide a great store of reference when they're collected into an atlas. They can depict the physical features of the entire planet if necessary, or just a small part of it in much greater detail. But there is a drawback. You can't exactly replicate something that is three-dimensional, like our planet, on a flat piece of paper, because paper has only 2 dimensions. And that means there'll always be a certain degree of distortion on a map. It can't be avoided. We can also use aerial photographs, pictures taken by cameras at high altitude above the Earth. These are great for showing all kinds of geographical features that are not easy to see from the ground. You can easily illustrate areas of diseased trees, or how much traffic is on the roads at a given time, or information about deep seabeds, for example. Then there are Landsats. These are satellites that circle the Earth and transmit visual information to computers at receiving stations. They circle the Earth several times a day and can provide a massive information. You'll all be familiar with the information they give us about the weather, for example. So what we're going to do now is look at a short presentation in which you'll see all these tools.
Human experts spend years roasting and tasting coffee from many places to learn about the beans. They might then combine a coffee bean from Africa with another one from South America to come up with a new blend. But a coffee roasting company in Helsinki, Finland, is hoping that artificial intelligence, or AI, can help ease the workload. Kaffa Roastery recently launched its AI-conic blend at the Helsinki Coffee Festival. The blend is a mixture of 4 kinds of beans, including Fazenda Pinhal from Brazil. It is the result of a joint project by Kaffa and Elev, a local AI business. Elev told the Associated Press that its computer models, similar to ChatGPT and Copilot, created a blend that would push the boundaries of conventional flavor combinations. Svante Hampf is the founder of Kaffa Roastery. He and his partners wanted to do an experiment to see what blend the computer would produce. We basically gave descriptions of all our coffee types and their flavors to AI and instructed it to create a new, exciting blend, Hampf said. The AI-conic blend combined beans from Brazil, Colombia, Ethiopia, and Guatemala. It is described as a well-balanced blend of sweetness and ripe fruit. Hampf said he thought the combination was somewhat weird. He was surprised that the AI program chose to make the blend out of 4 different kinds of beans. Most humans choose only 2 or 3 beans. However, after the first blind test of the new blend, Kaffa's coffee experts agreed that the AI-assisted blend was perfect. There was no need to change. Alev's Antti Merilato said AI-conic is an example of how AI can introduce new perspectives to seasoned professionals. The International Coffee Organization says that the 5.6 million people in Finland drink the most coffee per person in the world. And the roasters at Kaffa said they hope the AI project will help to bring more things to the strong coffee culture in the country. Hampf called it a first step, adding, "I think AI has plenty to offer us in the long run. We are particularly impressed of the coffee taste descriptions it created."
Gotta catch 'em all. Say this to any fan of Pokemon, and they'll know exactly what you're referring to. That's because this is the slogan for the Japanese media franchise Pokemon, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year with a series of special events. A Japanese video game designer and director called Satoshi Tajiri created Pokemon in 1995. It was launched the following year with the Japanese release of a couple of video games. They were designed for the original Game Boy system, owned by Japanese multinational consumer electronics and video game company Nintendo, and were developed by the Japanese video games firm Game Freak. Shortly afterwards, the Pokemon franchise was born. The protagonists of the franchise are imaginary creatures known as Pokemon. Humans, known as Pokemon trainers, capture them and train them to fight each other for sport. Every few years, the franchise releases a new generation of new Pokemon and new gaming concepts. It has released 8 generations in total, the most recent of which was released globally in late 2019. Today, Pokemon is one of the world's highest-grossing media franchises. It includes both the world's biggest-selling toy brand and trading card game. The original video game series has sold more than 368 million copies and been downloaded more than 1 billion times. In addition, the Pokemon universe has inspired the most successful video game adaptation ever, an animated or anime television series that's been broadcast in 169 countries, as well as an anime film series, a live-action film, books, manga comics, music, merchandise, and a theme park. This year, Pokemon is celebrating its 25th anniversary with a year-long celebration known as Pokemon 25. The event was announced at last year's Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York, which had a giant balloon of the popular Pokemon species Pikachu. It includes an augmented reality appearance of Pokemon on the International Space Station, a musical collaboration with the U.S. singer Katy Perry, and the release of a new simulation video game called New Pokemon Snap.
Sharpen your skills with this next listening session. Listen closely and snag every new word that floats by. Let's master your vocabulary. Unsheathe your inner voice and practice pronouncing each word. Craft a short sentence to acquire its meaning and lock it in your memory. Let's unleash your vocabulary potential.
Aristotle. Aristotle, third in the philosophical succession from Socrates to Plato, characterized by Dante as the master of those who know, was born in 384 BC in Stagira Chalcide, which is about 55 miles east of the present-day Greek city of Thessalonica. His name supposedly means highest purpose, which gives you an idea of what his parents had in mind for him. His father, the personal physician to King Amyntas II of Macedon, was named Nicomachus. Aristotle's parents both died when he was young, and he was brought up by an uncle named Praxenus. At the age of 18, he was sent to study in Athens at Plato's academy, where he remained for 20 years. Then, after Plato's death, he opened his own school, which he called the Lyceum. Aristotle wrote extensively about politics, ethics, metaphysics, and poetics. Aristotle was married to Pythias, the foster daughter of his friend and patron Hermias, king of the Greek city-state of Atarneus. They had a daughter named Pythias for her mother. After his wife's death, her servant, Herpyllis, became Aristotle's live-in mistress, and they had a son, Nicomachus, to whom Aristotle dedicated his famous philosophical work, the Nicomachean Ethics. When Aristotle was in his early 40s, he was invited by King Philip of Macedon to become the tutor of his son, Prince Alexander, better known as Alexander the Great. Teacher and pupil didn't always see eye to eye, and at one point Alexander accused Aristotle of wanting to assassinate him and threatened him with execution. Aristotle skedaddled back to Athens. When Alexander died in 323, after a prolonged drinking binge, Athenians were eager to rid themselves of any vestige of the hated Macedonians. Because of his association with Alexander, Aristotle was accused of some of the same crimes that Socrates had been charged with, and rather than stick around to see if he would meet the same fate, Aristotle got out of town fast, saying, "I will not allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy." He retired to his mother's family estate in Macedon, where he died shortly thereafter at the tender age of 62, from a stomach ailment, perhaps ulcers, that he suffered from much of his life. There is no evidence for either of two stories that were circulated after his death, that he killed himself with hemlock in tribute to Socrates, or that he threw himself into the sea because he could not explain the motion of the tides. Aristotle believed that soul and body were inseparable, the soul being a component of the body, keeping it alive and enriching it in much the same way as blood does. When the body died, so did the soul. While Aristotle did allow for the possibility of the immortality of the intellect, it is doubtful that he meant an individual personal intellect. In the Nicomachean Ethics, he wrote, "Death is the most terrible of all things, for it is the end, and nothing is any longer thought to be either good or bad for the dead."
We'll see you next time for more exciting and helpful videos to help you master your speaking fluency through our listening sessions. Thank you for being with us.